judge sent a veteran to jail. Then 60 bikers walked into the courtroom. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of the VA parking lot in Phoenix. It was mid-July, and the temperature had already climbed past 110 degrees by 10 in the morning. Michael Torres sat in his rusted 2003 Ford pickup truck, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The air conditioning had stopped working months ago, but he couldn't afford to fix it. Hell, he could barely afford the gas to get here. Through the windshield, wavering in the heat distortion, he could see the entrance to the Veterans Affairs Clinic, the same building he'd been to 17 times in the past 6 months. 17 times he'd sat in that waiting room with its fluorescent lights and generic landscape paintings. 17 times he'd filled out the same forms, answered the same questions, waited for hours only to have a 10-minute conversation with an overworked doctor who would adjust his medication and send him on his way. Michael was 34 years old, but he looked older, much older. His face was weathered beyond his years, with deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth. His dark hair, which he kept military short out of habit, was already showing streaks of grey at the temples. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment, and the things he'd seen there had left scars that no one could see, but that he felt every single day. "Come on, Mike. You can do this," he muttered to himself, finally releasing his death grip on the steering wheel. His hands were shaking. They shook most days now, especially in the mornings before his medication kicked in. The tremors were worse when he was stressed, and today everything was stressing him out. 3 weeks ago, he'd received the eviction notice. His landlord, a man named Harvey Chen, who owned half the apartment complexes in the neighborhood, had run out of patience. Michael was 4 months behind on rent, and despite his promises, despite his explanations, the math was simple. No payment, no apartment. He had until the end of the month to come up with $3,400, or he'd be on the street. He'd tried everything. He'd called his sister in Tucson, but she was struggling with her own mortgage after her husband left. He'd reached out to a few old Army buddies, but most of them were dealing with their own demons and financial troubles. He'd even swallowed his pride and applied for emergency assistance through veteran organizations, but the waiting list was 6 weeks long, and he'd be homeless by then. The job at the warehouse had ended 2 months ago. It wasn't his fault, not really. He'd had a panic attack when someone dropped a metal pallet near him. The sound, that sudden explosive crash, had sent him right back to Kandahar, to that marketplace where his best friend died. He'd dropped to the floor, covering his head, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to explain to his confused co-workers that he wasn't crazy. He was just broken. His supervisor had been sympathetic, but firm. "Look, Mike, I appreciate your service, I really do. My uncle was in Vietnam. But I can't have someone on the floor who might freeze up like that. It's a liability. I'm sorry." And just like that, the one thing keeping him afloat was gone. Michael finally forced himself out of the truck, the heat hitting him like a physical wave. He walked across the parking lot, his boots, the same ones he'd worn in the service, now worn and cracked, crunching on the gritty pavement. Inside the clinic, the blast of air conditioning was almost painful against his sun-heated skin. The waiting room was crowded as always. Veterans of all ages sat in the blue plastic chairs, some reading magazines, others staring at their phones, a few just staring at nothing. Michael recognized some of the faces. You saw the same people here week after week, month after month, all of them trying to hold together lives that had been fractured by service and sacrifice. He checked in at the desk with a tired-looking receptionist who barely glanced at him before handing him the clipboard with its stack of forms. He found a seat between an older Vietnam vet with a pronounced limp and a young woman who looked barely old enough to have served, though the Purple Heart cap on her lap told a different story. "How long you been waiting?" Michael asked the older vet, just to make conversation, just to keep his mind occupied. "Hour and a half so far," the man replied, not looking up from his phone. "Dr. Morrison's running behind again." Michael nodded and settled in for the long wait. He tried to focus on the forms, but the words kept swimming. He'd barely slept in 3 days. The nightmares had been worse lately, probably because of the stress. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back there. The dust, the heat, the sound of gunfire, the smell of blood and smoke. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, his heart racing, sometimes not even sure what country he was in. 2 hours passed, then 3. By the time his name was finally called, it was after 2 in the afternoon, and Michael's anxiety was at a peak. The medical assistant who led him back to the examination room was efficient but kind, taking his vitals and asking the standard questions. "How have you been feeling, Mr. Torres?" "Not great," he admitted. "The nightmares are worse. I'm not sleeping. And the anxiety, it's bad, really bad." She made notes on her tablet, nodding sympathetically. "Dr. Morrison will be with you shortly." But shortly turned into another 45 minutes. By the time the doctor finally knocked and entered, Michael was pacing the small room like a caged animal, his heart rate elevated, his breathing shallow. Doctor Morrison was in his late 50s, with grey hair and the exhausted look of someone who'd seen too much suffering and had too few resources to address it. He glanced at Michael's chart on his tablet, then at Michael himself. "Michael, how are we doing today?" "We aren't doing anything," Michael thought bitterly, but he bit back the sarcasm. "Not good, Doc. I need help. I'm about to lose my apartment. I lost my job, and I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't function. I need something that works." Dr. Morrison sat down on the rolling stool, still studying the tablet. "I see you're on sertraline and prazosin. How long have you been on this combination?" 4 months. It's not working. These medications can take time to reach full effectiveness." 4 months, Michael interrupted, his voice rising despite his effort to stay calm. 4 months, Doc, and I feel worse now than I did before. I need something different. I need something stronger. I need help now, not in another 4 months. The doctor's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. This was a conversation he'd had too many times, Michael realized. The conversation where a desperate veteran asks for help that the system isn't equipped to provide. "Michael, I understand your frustration, but we have to be careful with medication adjustments, especially with controlled substances. The risk of dependency. I don't care about dependency." Michael's voice was loud now, echoing off the sterile walls. "I care about not being homeless. I care about being able to sleep without seeing my friends die over and over. I care about being able to hold down a job." "Mr. Torres, please lower your voice." "Don't tell me to lower my voice." Michael was standing now, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. All the frustration, all the fear, all the rage that had been building for months was pouring out. "I did what my country asked me to do. I went over there, I fought, I watched good men die, and for what? To come home to this? To wait months for appointments? To beg for medication that doesn't work? To end up on the street? Michael, if you don't calm down, I'm going to have to call security." That sentence, cold and clinical, hit Michael like ice water. He saw it in the doctor's eyes, not sympathy, not understanding, but caution, maybe even fear. And he realized how he must look. A large, angry man with visible tattoos, military bearing and wild eyes, shouting in a small room. He took a step back, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. I'm sorry. I need help. Please." But it was too late. The doctor was already standing, already moving toward the door. "I'm going to refer you to a psychiatrist for a full evaluation. In the meantime, continue with your current medications. The referral should come through in 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks. Doc, I'll be homeless in 4 to 6 weeks. I'm sorry, Michael. That's the best I can do. Please check with the front desk about community resources on your way out." And then he was gone, leaving Michael standing alone in the examination room, his hands still shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Community resources. 4 to 6 weeks. The same useless answers he'd been getting for months. He left the clinic in a daze, barely registering the concerned look from the receptionist as he passed. The heat outside was like walking into an oven, but he barely noticed. He got in his truck and just sat there, engine off, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed. A text message from his landlord. Final notice. Payment by Friday or locks change Monday. No exceptions this time. Friday. 3 days away. And he had exactly $127 in his bank account. Something inside Michael broke in that moment. Not violently, but quietly. Like a rope that's been fraying for too long finally giving way. He'd been trying so hard to do everything right, to follow the rules, to be patient, to trust the system that was supposed to take care of veterans. But the system was broken, or maybe he was too broken for the system to fix. He started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot, not sure where he was going, just needing to move. He drove through Phoenix's sprawling neighborhoods, past strip malls and fast food restaurants, past the nice houses in the suburbs where people with normal lives lived normal lives that he could barely remember being part of. Eventually, he found himself in Old Town Scottsdale, the tourist area with its Western-themed shops and upscale restaurants. It was the kind of place he never went anymore, where everything was expensive and everyone seemed happy and carefree. He parked in a public lot and started walking, just trying to clear his head, trying to figure out what he was going to do. That's when he saw the motorcycle, a beautiful Harley-Davidson Street Glide, cherry red with chrome accents, parked outside an expensive steakhouse. It was the kind of bike Michael had dreamed of owning back in his early 20s, before the army, before Afghanistan, before everything went to hell. And next to the motorcycle, hanging from the handlebars, was a leather jacket with keys in the pocket. Michael's rational mind knew it was wrong. He'd never stolen anything in his life. He'd served his country with honor. He wasn't a criminal, but his rational mind was losing the battle to desperation and despair. The thought formed before he could stop it. He could sell that bike. It had to be worth at least $10,000, maybe 15. Enough to pay his rent, to get back on his feet, to buy himself time to figure things out. He looked around. The sidewalk was relatively empty in the afternoon heat. The owner was probably inside, enjoying lunch in the air conditioning. It would be so easy. Just walk over, take the keys, ride away. By the time anyone noticed, he'd be gone. His feet moved before his brain fully committed to the decision. He walked up to the bike, trying to look casual, like he belonged there. His hand reached out for the keys. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Michael spun around. A man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive-looking polo shirt was striding toward him from the restaurant entrance, his face red with anger. I was just looking," Michael stammered. But even he could hear how weak it sounded. "Looking?" The man pulled out his phone. "You were about to steal my bike. Don't move, I'm calling the police." "No, wait, I wasn't." But Michael couldn't finish the lie. He had been about to steal it. He had been that desperate, that broken. Everything that happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. Michael tried to explain, tried to apologize, but the words came out jumbled and incoherent. The man kept his distance, phone to his ear, giving the dispatcher a description of Michael. A small crowd started to gather, tourists and locals drawn by the confrontation. When the police arrived 7 minutes later, Michael didn't run. What was the point? He stood there, hands at his sides, and let the officers approach. They were professional but firm, asking questions, checking his ID, listening to the bike's owner give his statement. "I want to press charges," the man said firmly. "Full charges. Attempted theft." One of the officers, a younger man with a military-style haircut, seemed to hesitate. "Sir, are you sure?" "Sometimes in situations like this, I'm sure," the man interrupted. "I'm tired of thieves thinking they can just take whatever they want. Make an example of this one." And so they arrested Michael Torres, read him his rights, and put him in handcuffs. As they led him to the patrol car, he caught sight of his reflection in a shop window. A broken man, a failure, someone he didn't recognize anymore. This wasn't how his story was supposed to go. He'd been a ranger. He'd been someone who mattered, who contributed, who served. Now he was just another criminal being hauled away in the back of a police car. The holding cell at the Phoenix Police Department was crowded and smelled of sweat and disinfectant. Michael sat on a metal bench, surrounded by others who'd made bad decisions or been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He stared at his hands, still trembling, and wondered how it had come to this. Hours passed. Eventually, he was processed, fingerprinted, photographed, and allowed his one phone call. He called his sister, but it went to voicemail. He left a message, trying to keep his voice steady, trying not to sound as desperate as he felt. By the time he was released on his own recognizance around midnight, since he had no prior record and the judge at the arraignment deemed him not a flight risk, Michael was numb. He walked out of the police station into the still warm Phoenix night and called an Uber with the last of his phone's battery life. The court date was set for 3 weeks away. His public defender, a young woman named Rachel Chen, who looked like she'd just graduated law school, had met with him briefly and laid out the situation. "Mr. Torres, I'm going to be honest with you. Attempted theft of a vehicle is serious. The owner is insistent on pressing charges, and the prosecutor isn't offering any deals. If you're convicted, you're looking at possible jail time. Maybe a year, given your lack of priors and your military service, but still, jail." "I understand," Michael had said quietly. "I'm going to argue mitigating circumstances, your PTSD, your financial situation, the fact that you stopped before actually taking the bike. But I need you to help me. Get documentation from the VA about your treatment. Anything that shows you were in crisis, character references, anything that makes you sympathetic to the judge." Michael had nodded, but inside he felt hollow, sympathetic to the judge. That's what his life had been reduced to, hoping for sympathy. The 3 weeks that followed were the worst of Michael's life. The eviction went through. He moved what few possessions he could fit into his truck and started sleeping in the vehicle, parking in different Walmart parking lots each night to avoid being hassled. He showered at a community center that offered services to homeless veterans. He ate at food banks and soup kitchens. His sister finally called back, apologetic and guilty that she couldn't help financially, offering her spare room, but she lived 2 hours away in Tucson, and his court date was in Phoenix. He couldn't risk leaving the area. Rachel Chen did her best. She gathered his military records, his VA treatment documentation, statements from his former warehouse supervisor, and a few old army buddies who vouched for his character. She put together what she called a compelling case for leniency. But Michael had stopped believing in leniency. The system had chewed him up and spit him out at every turn. Why would the court be any different? The night before his court date, Michael sat in his truck in the parking lot of a closed shopping center, staring at the crescent moon through the windshield. He thought about just driving, getting on I-10 and heading east or west, anywhere but here, starting over somewhere new, with a new name, a new life. But he was tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of surviving. Whatever happened tomorrow, he would face it. He'd faced worse in Afghanistan. At least in a courtroom, no one was shooting at him. He just wished he felt like he had anyone in his corner, anyone who actually gave a damn about what happened to one broken veteran in a system full of broken veterans. Little did he know that by this time tomorrow, he wouldn't be facing it alone. The Maricopa County Courthouse stood as an imposing structure of glass and concrete in downtown Phoenix, its modern architecture reflecting the harsh morning sun. Michael Torres stood on the sidewalk outside, his only decent shirt, a wrinkled button-down he'd washed in a gas station bathroom sink, sticking to his back in the August heat. It was 7:45 a.m., and his hearing was scheduled for 9:00, but he'd arrived early, unable to sleep anyway. He'd parked his truck 3 blocks away in a free public lot, everything he owned, still packed in the back. If things went badly today, if the judge sent him to jail, He'd at least made sure the truck was in a safe spot where his sister could eventually come retrieve it and his belongings. The courthouse steps were already busy with lawyers in expensive suits, their briefcases swinging as they climbed toward the entrance. Families clustered near the doors, looking worried or resigned. Michael watched them all, feeling disconnected, like he was observing a world he no longer belonged to. "Michael!" He turned to see Rachel Chen hurrying across the plaza, a leather bag slung over her shoulder and a coffee in each hand. Despite the early hour and the heat, she looked put together in a navy pantsuit, her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun. "I brought you coffee," she said, handing him one of the cups. "Figured you could use it." "Thanks," Michael said, grateful for the gesture, even though his stomach was too knotted to consider actually drinking it. "How are we looking?" Rachel's expression was carefully neutral, her lawyer face. "Judge Harold Mitchell is presiding. He's tough, old school, but he's fair and he's a Korean War veteran himself, so that might work in our favor. The prosecutor is probably going to push hard, but I've got everything we talked about. Your service record is exemplary, Michael. 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart. Any judge would be a fool not to take that into consideration. And if he is a fool..." Rachel met his eyes, and for a moment the professional mask slipped, showing genuine concern. "Then we appeal. But let's not think that way. Come on, let's go over your statement one more time before we go in." They found a relatively quiet corner of the courthouse lobby and sat on a bench. Rachel pulled out her notes and went through the key points. Michael should be respectful, should acknowledge his mistake, should explain the crisis he was experiencing without making excuses, should emphasize his service and his attempts to get help through the VA. "The goal is to make them see you as a person," Rachel said, "not just a case number. You're a veteran who served honorably and came home to a system that failed you. That's the narrative we're pushing." "It's not a narrative," Michael said quietly. "It's the truth." "I know. And that's what makes it powerful." At 8:45, they went through security and made their way to Courtroom 4B on the 3rd floor. The courtroom was smaller than Michael had expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that gave everything a slightly washed-out look. There were about 20 seats for spectators, most of them already filled with people waiting for their own cases to be called. Michael and Rachel took their seats at the defense table. Across the aisle, the prosecutor, a man in his 40s with the kind of aggressive posture that suggested he thought every defendant was guilty until proven otherwise, was shuffling through papers. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff, a heavy-set man with a grey mustache, stood and called out, "All rise! The Honorable Judge Harold Mitchell presiding!" Everyone stood as the judge entered from a door behind the bench. Judge Mitchell was in his late 70s, Michael guessed, with white hair, thick glasses, and the ramrod-straight posture of someone who'd carried military bearing into civilian life. He wore his black robe like a uniform and surveyed the courtroom with sharp, assessing eyes. "Be seated," the judge said, his voice gravelly but strong. He settled into his chair and picked up a file folder, flipping it open. "Let's begin. Case number 2024 CR 8847, State of Arizona versus Michael Anthony Torres." Michael stood, Rachel beside him. His heart was hammering so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. "Mr. Torres, you're charged with attempted theft of a vehicle valued at over $10,000. How do you plead?" Michael's throat was dry. "Guilty, Your Honor." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. He glanced at Rachel. "Ms. Chen, your client is pleading guilty?" "Yes, Your Honor." Mr. Torres accepts responsibility for his actions. "However, we're asking the court to consider significant mitigating circumstances before sentencing." Judge Mitchell nodded and looked at the prosecutor. "Mr. Walsh, does the state have any objections to proceeding directly to sentencing arguments?" The prosecutor stood. "No objection, Your Honor. In fact, the state welcomes it. This is a straightforward case. Mr. Torres attempted to steal a valuable motorcycle in broad daylight. The only reason he didn't succeed is because the owner caught him in the act. The state recommends a sentence of 18 months in county jail as a deterrent to others who might think they can commit property crimes without consequences. 18 months. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. 18 months in jail. By the time he got out, he'd have lost everything, what little he had left anyway. No job prospects, no apartment, no future. Rachel immediately stood. Your Honor, 18 months is excessive and inappropriate given the circumstances. If I may present our case. You may, Ms. Chen. Rachel launched into her argument, and Michael had to admit she was good. She presented his military service record first, having the judge look at the actual commendations, the descriptions of his valor in combat. She explained his deployments, the intensity of his combat experience, the trauma he'd witnessed. Then she moved to his struggles after returning home. She cited statistics about veteran suicide rates, about PTSD, about the systemic failures of the VA system. She presented documentation of his 17 appointments, his medication changes, his attempts to get help. She brought up his job loss, his eviction, his descent into homelessness, not as excuses, but as context for understanding how a decorated war hero could end up in such a desperate situation. Your Honor, Rachel said, her voice ringing with conviction, Michael Torres is not a criminal. He's a casualty of war. He served his country with distinction, and his country failed him. On that day in Scottsdale, he was in the midst of a mental health crisis. He made a terrible decision, yes, and he owns that, but punishing him with jail time doesn't serve justice. It just breaks him further. What he needs is help, not incarceration. She presented an alternative sentencing recommendation: probation, mandatory mental health treatment, community service, restitution to the motorcycle owner for his time and inconvenience. Give him a chance to rebuild his life, Rachel concluded. He's earned that much. Michael felt a flicker of hope as he watched the judge making notes. Maybe Rachel had gotten through to him. Maybe. Then the prosecutor stood for his rebuttal, and that flicker died. Your Honor, Ms. Chen paints a very sympathetic picture, and I don't doubt Mr. Torres has struggled, but this court sees veterans every week. We see people with PTSD, with addiction, with mental health issues, and most of them manage not to commit crimes. Most of them find a way to get help without stealing from others. Walsh pulled out photos of the motorcycle, pristine and beautiful. This bike is worth over $15,000. It belongs to Mr. Richard Paulson, a retired teacher who saved for 3 years to buy it. Mr. Torres would have stolen it and likely sold it, leaving Mr. Paulson without his property and without recourse. That's not a victimless crime, Your Honor. That's theft, pure and simple. He turned to look directly at Michael, his expression hard. I respect Mr. Torres's service. My father was a Marine. But service doesn't give anyone a free pass to break the law. If we let veterans off easy because of their PTSD, where does it end? Do we excuse assault, robbery? Where's the line? We're not asking for him to be let off easy, Rachel interjected. We're asking for appropriate sentencing that takes into account. Ms. Chen, Judge Mitchell interrupted quietly. You've had your say. Let Mr. Walsh finish. Rachel sat down, her jaw tight. Walsh continued, the state believes that a significant jail sentence is necessary here, not just for punishment, but for deterrence. This community needs to know that theft is taken seriously, regardless of the circumstances. The state stands by its recommendation of 18 months. He sat down, looking satisfied. Judge Mitchell removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The courtroom was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the rustle of papers. Finally, the judge spoke. Mr. Torres, would you like to address the court? Michael stood, his legs shaky. This was it, his chance to speak for himself. He'd rehearsed this with Rachel a dozen times, but now, standing there with the judge's eyes on him, all his prepared words evaporated. Your Honor, He paused, took a breath. I'm ashamed of what I did. I've never stolen anything in my life. I was raised better than that. I served honorably because I believed in something bigger than myself. But that day, I wasn't thinking about honor or service or doing the right thing. I was thinking about the fact that I was sleeping in my truck, that I hadn't eaten a real meal in days, that I couldn't get the help I needed from the VA even though I was falling apart. His voice cracked slightly, and he forced himself to continue. I'm not making excuses. What I did was wrong. But I'm asking you to understand that I'm not that person. I'm not a thief. I'm a soldier who's lost, and I'm trying to find my way back. If you send me to jail, I think that'll be the end for me. I won't have anything left to come back to. He met the judge's eyes. Give me a chance to be the man I used to be. Please. He sat down, his hands trembling in his lap. Rachel squeezed his arm reassuringly, but her expression was tense. They'd done all they could. Now it was up to the judge. Judge Mitchell put his glasses back on and looked at Michael for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and began making notes, his face unreadable. The seconds stretched into minutes, the silence in the courtroom becoming oppressive. Finally, the judge set down his pen and folded his hands on the bench. Mr. Torres, I've been on this bench for 23 years. I've seen thousands of defendants come through this courtroom. I've heard every excuse, every sob story, every plea for leniency, and I've learned that my job is not to be sympathetic. My job is to uphold the law and to ensure that justice is served. Michael's heart sank. This wasn't going well. Ms. Chen has presented a compelling case for alternative sentencing. Your military service is indeed commendable. Your struggles with PTSD are real and documented. But Mr. Walsh is also correct that we cannot simply excuse criminal behavior because someone has had a difficult time. The judge paused, looking down at his notes. You attempted to steal a motorcycle worth over $15,000. You were caught in the act. And while I understand you were in crisis, the fact remains that you made a choice, a criminal choice. Your Honor, Rachel began, but Judge Mitchell held up a hand. I'm not finished, Ms. Chen. He looked back at Michael. The law is clear on sentences for this type of crime. Given the value of the property and the circumstances, the sentencing guidelines recommend 12 to 24 months of incarceration. 12 to 24 months. Michael felt the room spinning. This couldn't be happening. However, the judge continued, I also have discretion in sentencing, particularly for first-time offenders. I could order probation, treatment, community service, as Ms. Chen suggests. Hope flickered again in Michael's chest. But here's my concern, Mr. Torres. If I let you off with a slap on the wrist, am I really helping you? Am I giving you the wake-up call you need? Or am I just enabling your downward spiral? Judge Mitchell leaned forward, his voice becoming harder. You say you're lost, that you're trying to find your way back. But it seems to me that you've been trying to find your way back through the VA, through the system, through asking for help, and it hasn't worked. Maybe what you need is not sympathy. Maybe what you need is to hit rock bottom so hard that you have no choice but to start climbing back up. No, Michael thought desperately. Please, no. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 12 months in the Maricopa County Jail with credit for time served. You will also pay restitution to Mr. Paulson in the amount of $500 for his time and inconvenience. Bailiff, please take Mr. Torres into custody. The words hit like hammer blows. 12 months, a year in jail. The bailiff was already moving toward him, handcuffs ready. Your Honor, please. Rachel was on her feet, her voice urgent. I request that you reconsider. This sentence is, Ms. Chen, my decision is final. You have the right to appeal, but in this courtroom right now, my word stands. Mr. Torres, do you understand your sentence? Michael could barely process what was happening. He saw Rachel's stricken face, heard her saying something about an appeal, felt the bailiff's hand on his arm. His mind was screaming, no, not like this, not now. But his body was moving mechanically, standing, turning, allowing his wrists to be cuffed behind his back. This was it. This was how his story ended. Not in combat, not serving his country, but here, in a courtroom, being taken to jail like a common criminal. The bailiff began to lead him toward the side door that led to the holding cells. Rachel was gathering her papers frantically, still talking about appeals and next steps, but her words sounded like they were coming from underwater. Michael took one last look at the courtroom, at the faces of strangers who'd witnessed his judgment, at the prosecutor who looked grimly satisfied, at the judge who'd just sealed his fate. And then he heard it, the sound of heavy boots on the courthouse floor. Many heavy boots. The courtroom doors at the back burst open, not violently but with purpose, and suddenly the room was filled with people. Not just people, bikers. Dozens of them, flooding into the courtroom in a sea of leather and denim, the smell of motorcycle exhaust and road dust following them in. Everyone froze. The bailiff stopped pulling on Michael's arm. Rachel spun around, her eyes wide. The prosecutor stood up, looking alarmed. And Judge Mitchell's hand moved to his gavel, though he didn't strike it yet. The bikers kept coming, filing into the courtroom in disciplined rows, filling every seat, lining the walls, standing in the aisles. Michael counted 20, 30, 40 bikers, still more coming through the door, all of them wearing leather vests covered in patches and pins. Many of those patches bore the same symbol, an American flag with an eagle and words that read, "Patriot Guard Riders." At the front of the group was a man who had to be in his 60s, barrel-chested with a grey beard and intense blue eyes. He wore a leather vest covered in military patches, Air Force, Vietnam, Purple Heart, Bronze Star. He walked straight up to the bar that separated the spectators from the courtroom floor and planted himself there, arms crossed, staring directly at the judge. Behind him, the other bikers stood at attention. Some were older, Vietnam era, with white beards and weathered faces. Others were younger, Iraq and Afghanistan veterans like Michael, their eyes hard with shared understanding. A few were women, tough and proud in their leather, but all of them wore the same expression: "We're here, and we're not leaving." Judge Mitchell's face had gone from stern to shocked to something else. Something Michael couldn't quite read. The judge slowly stood, his gaze moving across the sea of leather and American flag patches. "What," he said slowly, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "is the meaning of this?" The bearded man at the front spoke, his voice carrying the same command authority that Michael remembered from his ranger instructors. "Your Honor, my name is Robert Bulldog Henderson, United States Air Force, retired. I'm the captain of the Arizona chapter of the Patriot Guard Riders, and these 60 bikers behind me are all veterans. We're here for Michael Torres." Now Judge Mitchell's grip on his gavel tightened. "This is highly irregular. This is a courtroom, not a rally. I could hold all of you in contempt." "You could," Bulldog agreed, not backing down an inch. "But you won't, because we're not here to disrupt your court, Your Honor. We're here to bear witness. We're here to stand for one of our own." Another voice spoke up from the crowd, a woman in her 50s with short grey hair. "Your Honor, I'm Maria Santos, Army medic, Desert Storm. I was in this same courtroom 6 years ago for a DUI. I was drinking because I couldn't handle the PTSD. Judge Peterson, who was here before you, sent me to jail for 8 months. It destroyed my life. I lost my kids, my house, everything." She stepped forward, her voice strong despite the obvious emotion. "These riders found me when I got out. They helped me rebuild. They got me into real treatment, not the VA runaround. They gave me a family when I'd lost mine. Now I'm 3 years sober, I have my kids back, and I help other veterans who are where I was." Another biker spoke up, a young man with a prosthetic leg visible below his jeans. "Your Honor, I'm Danny Ortiz, Marines. IED took my leg in Fallujah. I tried to rob a convenience store 2 years after I got back because I couldn't afford my medication, public defender, just like Michael's, and I got lucky. The judge I had understood. He gave me treatment instead of jail. These riders were at my sentencing, too. They vouched for me. Now I'm enrolled in ASU. I'm studying social work, and I ride with them to help other veterans." More voices joined in, one after another, each veteran sharing their story. The courtroom had become something else, not a place of judgment but a place of testimony. The prosecutor looked increasingly uncomfortable, and even the bailiff had loosened his grip on Michael's arm. Finally, Bulldog raised his hand, and the other voices quieted. He looked directly at Michael, then back at the judge. "Your Honor, I didn't serve in Afghanistan like Michael did. I was in Vietnam, different war, same hell. But I know what it's like to come home and feel like you don't belong anywhere. To feel like you left part of yourself in the jungle or the desert or wherever you served. To try to fit back into a world that doesn't understand what you've seen." He gestured to the bikers behind him. "We all know that feeling. Every person in this courtroom wearing leather right now has been where Michael Torres is. Some of us made it through, some of us didn't, but the ones who made it, we made it because someone gave us a chance. Someone saw us as more than our worst moment." Bulldog's voice softened slightly, but lost none of its intensity. "You're about to send this man to jail. You're about to take a decorated Army Ranger who served his country with honor and lock him in a cage like an animal. And you know what that'll do to him? It'll kill him. Maybe not right away, but it will. I've seen it happen too many times." He reached into his vest and pulled out a worn photograph, holding it up for the judge to see. "This is my son, Tommy. Marines, 2 tours in Iraq. He came home with PTSD, just like Michael. He tried to get help from the VA, just like Michael. And when he hit his breaking point, he made a mistake. The judge sent him to jail for 10 months. "Ah." Bulldog's voice cracked, and for the first time his composure wavered. "He hung himself in his cell after 3 weeks. He was 26 years old." The courtroom was utterly silent. Even Judge Mitchell had gone pale. "I started riding with the Patriot Guard after that," Bulldog continued, roughly wiping his eyes, "because I couldn't save my son, but maybe I could save somebody else's son, somebody else's daughter, somebody else's brother or sister or friend who's fighting a war inside their own head and losing." He pointed at Michael. "That man right there is worth saving, Your Honor. I can see it in his eyes. He's not gone yet. He's still fighting. And if you give us a chance, if you give him a chance, we will be there for him, every single one of us." Another biker stepped forward, an older man with Native American features and long gray braids. "Your Honor, I'm Thomas Redhorse, Army, Vietnam. I run a veterans transitional housing program here in Phoenix. If you release Michael to our care, I guarantee he'll have a place to stay, 3 meals a day, and access to proper mental health treatment. Not the VA runaround, real treatment with therapists who understand military trauma." A younger biker covered in tattoos spoke next. "I'm Marcus Webb, Air Force, Iraq. I own a construction company. I'll give Michael a job full-time with benefits. He'll have purpose, structure, and income." More offers poured in. A biker who ran a motorcycle repair shop, another who managed a warehouse, a woman who directed a veterans crisis center, each one pledging something concrete, something real, something that the system had failed to provide. Rachel was frantically taking notes, her earlier despair replaced with something that looked like hope. The prosecutor had sat back down, no longer looking so confident. Judge Mitchell slowly sat down as well, his face unreadable. He looked at Michael, really looked at him for the first time. Then he looked at the 60 bikers filling his courtroom, each one a story of service and sacrifice, each one standing as proof that veterans could recover, could rebuild, could become whole again. "Miss Chen," the judge said finally, his voice very quiet, "approach the bench. Mr. Walsh, you too." The lawyers hurried forward, and a hushed conversation took place that Michael couldn't hear. It lasted several minutes, with Rachel gesturing emphatically and Walsh looking increasingly resigned. Finally, they returned to their tables. Judge Mitchell picked up his gavel, studying it for a moment before setting it back down without using it. "Mr. Torres, please face the court." Michael turned, his heart hammering. The bailiff had removed the handcuffs, perhaps recognizing that the situation had changed. "In 23 years on this bench," Judge Mitchell said. "I have never seen anything like what just happened here. I have never had 60 people march into my courtroom to stand for a defendant. It's unprecedented, it's irregular, and by all rights, I should clear this courtroom and proceed as originally planned." He paused, and Michael braced himself for the worst. "But I'm not going to do that, because everything these riders have said is true. Our system is failing our veterans. The VA is overwhelmed and underfunded, and sending broken warriors to jail doesn't fix them, it finishes breaking them." Judge Mitchell looked at Bulldog Henderson, then back at Michael. "You have something here that most defendants don't have. A community willing to support you. People who believe in you and who are putting their reputations on the line for you. That means something." The judge picked up his pen and began writing on the sentencing form. "I'm setting aside my previous sentence. Instead, Mr. Torres, you are hereby sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation with the following conditions. You will reside at the transitional housing program run by Mr. Redhorse. You will maintain full-time employment. You will attend mandatory mental health counseling twice weekly with a therapist who specializes in combat-related PTSD. You will perform 200 hours of community service. You will pay restitution to Mr. Paulson. And you will report monthly to the Patriot Guard Riders, who will provide regular updates to your probation officer and to this court on your progress." Rachel was grinning. Several of the bikers were smiling. Michael felt tears stinging his eyes but refused to let them fall. "Additionally," the judge continued, "I'm ordering the county to establish a liaison program between the court system and veteran support organizations, so that we can identify veterans in crisis before they end up in my courtroom facing criminal charges. I'm tired of seeing soldiers destroyed by a system that should be protecting them." He looked sternly at Michael. "Mr. Torres, you're getting a second chance that most people don't get. These people behind you believe in you. I'm choosing to believe in you too. Don't make me regret it." "I won't, Your Honor," Michael managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear I won't." "Then this court is adjourned." Judge Mitchell struck his gavel once, stood, and left the bench. For a moment no one moved. Then Bulldog Henderson let out a whoop, and suddenly the courtroom erupted into motion. The bikers surged forward, surrounding Michael, clapping him on the back, shaking his hand, welcoming him into their circle. Rachel was hugging her briefcase in relief, her professional composure cracking into a genuine smile. Even the bailiff was grinning, clearly moved by what he'd just witnessed. Bulldog grabbed Michael in a bear hug that lifted him off his feet. "Welcome to the family, brother," he said gruffly. "You're not alone anymore. You hear me? You're not alone." Michael couldn't hold back the tears any longer. He wept, but they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope for the first time in longer than he could remember. The prosecutor quietly gathered his files and left without a word. But Judge Mitchell, Michael noticed, had paused in the doorway to his chambers. He was watching the scene in his courtroom, the bikers, the celebration, the broken soldier being lifted up by his tribe. And Judge Mitchell was smiling. The Arizona sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon as 60 motorcycles roared out of downtown Phoenix, their engines creating a symphony of power that echoed off the glass buildings. Michael Torres rode on the back of Bulldog Henderson's bike, his arms wrapped around the older man's waist, still trying to process what had just happened. 2 hours ago, he'd been facing a year in jail. Now he was riding through Phoenix with a family he hadn't known existed, heading toward a future that had seemed impossible just that morning. The convoy moved in formation, 3 columns of bikes maintaining a disciplined pattern that spoke to military precision. Michael had ridden motorcycles before. In his early 20s, before the army, he'd had a beat-up Kawasaki that he'd loved. But this was different. This was riding with purpose, with brothers and sisters at your side, part of something bigger than yourself. It reminded him, painfully and beautifully, of what he'd lost when he left the service. They rode east, out of the downtown area, through neighborhoods that gradually transitioned from urban to suburban, to semi-rural. The landscape was classic Arizona, lots of beige stucco, palm trees, and gravel yards with desert plants. The August heat was still intense, but with the wind created by movement it was bearable. After about 20 minutes, Bulldog turned down a dusty road that led to a property surrounded by chain-link fence. A hand-painted sign hung on the gate. Second Chance Ranch, Veterans Transitional Housing, Thomas Redhorse, Director. The lead bikes stopped at the gate, and the man Michael had seen earlier, Thomas Redhorse, with his long grey braids and weathered face, dismounted and opened it. The convoy rolled through, and Michael got his first look at his new home. It wasn't fancy. 6 single-story buildings arranged in a semicircle around a central courtyard area with picnic tables, a fire pit, and a flagpole where an American flag snapped in the breeze. The buildings looked like they'd been repurposed from some old motel or military barracks, but they were clean and well-maintained, with fresh paint and intact screens on the windows. Beyond the main buildings, Michael could see a garden area, a workshop with tools, and what looked like a small garage. A basketball hoop stood at one end of an asphalt court. It was simple, functional, and felt more welcoming than anywhere Michael had been in months. The bikes pulled into a gravel parking area, and engines cut off one by one until the desert quiet returned, broken only by the ping of cooling metal and the rustle of the wind. Bulldog helped Michael off the bike, steadying him when his legs proved unsteady. The older man grinned. "First time in a while on 2 wheels." "Yeah," Michael admitted. "Forgot how intense it is. You'll get used to it. In fact," Bulldog gestured broadly to the assembled bikers who were dismounting and pulling off their helmets. "That's going to be part of your therapy. We ride every Saturday, all of us. It's not just transportation, brother. It's freedom. It's meditation. It's remembering that life can still be good." Thomas Redhorse walked over, extending his hand to Michael. Up close, Michael could see the man was probably in his early 70s, but he moved with the ease of someone much younger. His eyes, dark and deep, seemed to see right through Michael's defenses. "Welcome to Second Chance, Michael," Thomas said. His voice had a gentle quality but carried an underlying strength. "I meant what I said in that courtroom. You have a place here for as long as you need it." "I thank you," Michael said, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to repay—" "You don't repay it," Thomas interrupted gently. "You pay it forward. When you're back on your feet, when you're whole again, you help the next veteran who needs it. That's how this works. That's how we build something bigger than ourselves." More bikers gathered around, introducing themselves one by one. There was Danny Ortiz, the young Marine with the prosthetic leg, who had a quick smile and an easy laugh. Maria Santos, the former Army medic, whose stern exterior softened when she smiled. Marcus Webb, the Air Force vet with the construction company, who had the kind of handshake that said he was measuring your character. Each had a story. Each had been broken. Each had found their way back. A woman in her 40s with short auburn hair and a leather vest covered in patches approached. She introduced herself as Sarah Mitchell, no relation to the judge, she clarified with a wry smile, and explained that she was the coordinator for the Patriot Guard Riders veteran support programs. "I'm going to be your main point of contact," Sarah explained as she walked Michael toward one of the residential buildings. "I'll help coordinate your therapy appointments, your job placement, your probation check-ins, all of it. Think of me as your case manager, but one who actually gives a damn and has time to help you." She opened the door to one of the buildings. Inside was a long hallway with doors on either side. Individual rooms. It was clean, with tile floors and fluorescent lighting. It reminded Michael of military barracks, and he found that strangely comforting. "You'll be in room 7, Sarah said, leading him down the hall. "You'll have 2 roommates. We find that works better than isolation. These guys have all been here a few months. They know the routine. They can help you get adjusted." She opened the door to room 7. It was simple but sufficient. 3 single beds, 3 small dressers, 3 closet spaces. One wall had a window that looked out on the desert beyond the ranch. It was nothing fancy, but compared to sleeping in his truck, it was luxury. Two men were in the room. One was a younger guy, maybe late 20s, African-American, with a military haircut and cautious eyes. The other was older, probably early 50s, Hispanic, with grey in his hair and burn scars visible on his arms. "Michael, these are your roommates," Sarah said. "This is James Wilson, Air Force, served in Afghanistan. And this is Roberto Diaz, Army, Iraq War." James stood and offered his hand. "Hey, man, welcome. We heard about what happened in court. That was something." Roberto nodded from his bed where he'd been reading a paperback. "Yeah," Bulldog called ahead. "Said you're one of us now." I guess I am," Michael said, still processing everything. Sarah showed him where to store his things, which wouldn't take long since he had so little, and explained the house rules. Curfew at 10 p.m. on weeknights, midnight on weekends, mandatory house meetings every Monday night, shared chores on a rotation, no alcohol or drugs on the property, though nobody would police whether you had a beer off-site, as long as you weren't driving. Respect for others' space and belongings. "We're not a prison," Sarah explained, "but we're also not a crash pad. This place works because everyone commits to being better, to healing, to helping each other. The moment someone decides they're not interested in that, they're asked to leave." "Understood," Michael said. "Good. Now, your therapy appointments start tomorrow afternoon. I've got you set up with Dr. Amanda Price. She's fantastic. She specializes in combat PTSD, and she's a veteran herself. Navy. She gets it." Michael felt a wave of relief. Not another overworked VA doctor who had 10 minutes to spare. An actual therapist who might actually help. "And Monday, you'll start work with Marcus at his construction company. It's physical work, framing, drywall, general labor. But Marcus says you'll be good at it. He's worked with a lot of veterans. He knows how to manage around PTSD triggers." Sarah checked her watch. "Okay, it's almost 6. Dinner is in the common building at 6:30. I suggest you get cleaned up and meet everyone. Tonight's a cookout. We're celebrating you not going to jail." She left with a smile, and Michael was alone with his new roommates. James broke the ice first. "So you really almost stole a Harley?" Michael winced. "Yeah, not my finest moment." "Hey, no judgment here," Roberto said, finally setting down his book. "I got arrested for punching a cop during a flashback. Thought I was back in Baghdad. Thought he was insurgent. Broke his jaw. That's why I'm here instead of in prison. And I got busted for possession," James added. "Was using to try to quiet the noise in my head. Stupid, but I didn't know what else to do. These folks gave me a chance to clean up and sort my shit out." Michael sat down on his bed in a real room with people who understood. "How long have you guys been here?" 4 months, Roberto said. "I'm close to transitioning out, actually. Got a job lined up at a warehouse, found an apartment I can afford, but I'm in no rush. This place, it's healing, you know." 3 months for me, James said. "I'm doing online classes for my associate's degree. These guys helped me get enrolled. I'm thinking maybe I'll become a counselor or something, help other vets." They talked for a while, sharing stories, finding common ground. Roberto had been in Mosul. Michael had been in Kandahar. Different wars, different battles, same demons. James was younger, but his experiences in Afghanistan were eerily similar to Michael's. The IED attacks, the constant vigilance, the way you could never fully relax because death might come from anywhere at any moment. At 6:30, they headed to the common building. It was a larger structure with a full kitchen, a dining area with long tables, a TV lounge, and what looked like a small library filled with books and board games. Outside, behind the building, was a large covered patio area where several bikers were manning 3 big grills. The smell of burgers and hot dogs filled the air, and Michael's stomach reminded him that he'd barely eaten that day. Bulldog saw him and waved him over. "Torres, get over here. You're going to help me with these burgers. Best way to join a family is to share in the work." For the next hour, Michael worked alongside Bulldog, flipping burgers and joking with the other bikers who rotated through. It was the kind of casual camaraderie he'd missed desperately since leaving the army. The ball-busting, the storytelling, the sense of belonging to something. When the food was ready, everyone gathered at the long tables. There had to be 40 people, not just the bikers from the courthouse, but other residents of the ranch, staff members, volunteers. Thomas Redhorse stood and called for attention. "Before we eat, I want to say something," the older man said. "Today, we witnessed something important. We saw our broken system be confronted with the reality of what it does to our veterans. And we saw a judge have the courage to do the right thing instead of the easy thing." There were murmurs of agreement around the tables. "Michael Torres is joining our community today, not as a criminal, but as a brother who needs help. And we're going to give him that help, the way we've helped so many others, because that's what we do. We stand for each other when no one else will." Thomas raised a glass of iced tea. "To Michael, and to second chances." "To Michael," the group echoed, and everyone drank. The meal was simple but delicious, or maybe it just tasted better because Michael was eating it, surrounded by people who cared. He sat between Danny Ortiz and Maria Santos, listening to their stories, sharing bits of his own, feeling the hard shell he'd built around himself starting to crack. After dinner, as the sun finally set and the desert cooled, someone started a fire in the pit in the central courtyard. People gathered around with beers, for those who could drink, and sodas, and the conversation flowed easy and natural. Bulldog sat down next to Michael, handing him a Coke. "How you holding up?" I don't know," Michael admitted. "This morning I thought my life was over. Now I'm here, surrounded by all you guys, and I don't understand why you did it. Why you all showed up for me. You don't even know me." Bulldog took a long pull from his beer before answering. "You remember what I said about my son, Tommy?" Michael nodded, remembering the photograph, the pain in the older man's voice. "After he died, I was destroyed. I blamed myself. I blamed the system. I blamed God. And I was angry, so fucking angry all the time. I started drinking heavy, pushing away my wife, pushing away everyone. I was on a fast track to drinking myself to death." Bulldog stared into the fire. "Then one day, about 6 months after Tommy's funeral, I got a call from a guy I'd served with in Vietnam. His son had just come back from Iraq, was struggling, and my buddy was scared he was going to lose him. He asked me if I'd talk to the kid." "And did you?" Michael asked. "Yeah. I drove out to Tucson, met this 23-year-old Marine who reminded me so much of Tommy it hurt. And I talked to him. I told him about my son. I told him what I wished I'd done differently. I told him that there was hope, even when it didn't feel like it." Bulldog smiled slightly. "Kid's name was Alex. He's actually here tonight, that guy over there with the beard talking to Sarah." Michael looked over and saw a younger man, probably late 20s now, laughing at something Sarah had said. "I helped Alex get into treatment, real treatment, and I realized that maybe that's what I was supposed to do. Maybe I couldn't save Tommy, but I could save other Tommies. So I started riding with the Patriot Guard, started working with Second Chance Ranch, started showing up at court hearings when I heard there was a veteran in trouble." Bulldog turned to look directly at Michael. "We showed up for you today because we've all been you. Maybe not exactly your situation, but close enough. We know what it's like to feel abandoned by the country we served. We know what it's like to struggle with demons nobody else can see. And we know what it's like to need someone to believe in us when we can't believe in ourselves." He clapped Michael on the shoulder. "You're not alone anymore, brother. You got 60 people who have your back now. Use that. Lean on us when you need to. Get yourself right. And then, when you're solid, you help the next guy. That's how we win this war, the war against the demons inside us." Michael felt tears threatening again, but this time he didn't try to hide them. "I won't let you down. I know you won't. And if you stumble, which you probably will because healing isn't a straight line, we'll be there to help you up. That's what family does. The evening stretched on, and Michael found himself talking to different people, hearing their stories, sharing his own. He met Jorge, who'd been homeless for 3 years before the Patriot Guard found him sleeping under a bridge. He met Catherine, a female army veteran who'd been assaulted by a fellow soldier and struggled with trust and anxiety ever since. He met Chuck, an older Vietnam vet who'd spent 20 years in and out of jail before finally getting clean and sober and becoming one of the ranch's counselors. Each story was different, but each story had the same theme. Someone had been falling, and the community had caught them. Around 10 p.m., people started drifting off to bed. Michael walked back to his room with James and Roberto, feeling exhausted, but lighter than he'd felt in months. As he lay in his bed that night, listening to Roberto's gentle snoring and James tapping on his laptop, Michael stared at the ceiling and thought about the strange turn his life had taken. This morning, he'd been a failure, a criminal, someone the system had given up on. Tonight, he was part of a family. It wasn't going to be easy. He knew that. The PTSD didn't just disappear because he had support now. The depression, the anxiety, the nightmares. They'd all still be there. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had to fight them alone. He thought about Bulldog's son, Tommy, and wondered what the young Marine would have become if he'd had people like this around him. He thought about all the veterans who didn't get lucky, who didn't have 60 bikers show up to save them, who fell through the cracks and never got back up. And he made a promise to himself and to Tommy's memory. He would get better. He would heal. He would become the kind of person who could help save the next veteran who needed it, because that's what this family did. They saved each other. Tomorrow would start the real work, the therapy, the job, the rebuilding of his life. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Michael Torres slept without nightmares. He slept like a man who had hope. 3 months later, Michael Torres stood in front of the mirror in the Second Chance Ranch bathroom, adjusting the collar of his work shirt. His reflection showed a different man than the one who'd stood in that courtroom facing a year in jail. He'd gained 15 pounds of healthy weight, his eyes were clearer, and the constant tension in his jaw had eased. It was 5:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning in early November, and today was a big day. Today was the group ride, the monthly long ride that the Patriot Guard did together, and Michael would be riding his own bike for the first time. The bike had been a gift from the group, sort of. They'd found an old Honda Shadow that had been sitting in someone's garage for years, not running, covered in dust. Marcus had supervised while Michael and a few other veterans from the ranch had spent 6 weeks rebuilding it. New battery, new tires, carburetor cleaning, oil change, paint job. It was a project, a learning experience, and therapy all rolled into one, and now it ran like a dream. Michael splashed cold water on his face and thought about the past 3 months. They'd been the hardest and best months of his life. The therapy with Dr. Amanda Price had been brutal. Unlike the 10-minute medication adjustments at the VA, these were real sessions. 90 minutes, twice a week, diving deep into the trauma. She'd introduced him to EMDR therapy, a technique that helped process traumatic memories. The first few sessions had been devastating. He'd relived moments from Afghanistan he'd buried deep. The day his friend Martinez died in that marketplace, the children caught in crossfire, the impossible choices they'd had to make. But Dr. Price had helped him understand that reliving it in a safe environment with someone who understood was how he could start to heal. She'd explained that PTSD wasn't weakness. It was a normal response to abnormal situations. His brain had learned to be hypervigilant because that kept him alive in Afghanistan. Now he had to teach his brain that it was safe here, that the war was over. It was slow work. He still had nightmares, though less frequently. He still had moments of anxiety, though he was learning techniques to manage them. He still struggled with anger sometimes, with feeling disconnected from the world around him. But he was learning, growing, healing. The job with Marcus's construction company had been another crucial piece. The work was physical and demanding, framing houses in the Phoenix heat, hanging drywall, sometimes working on roofs. It was exhausting, but it was also purposeful. At the end of each day, Michael could see what he'd built. It was tangible progress in a way that therapy wasn't. Marcus had been patient with him, understanding when the sounds of nail guns sent him into brief panic attacks, knowing when to give him space and when to push him to work through the discomfort. The other workers on the crew were mostly veterans too, part of Marcus's commitment to hiring former service members. They looked out for each other, and the money made a difference. Michael was making $18 an hour, and while that wasn't getting him rich, it was enough. He'd paid off his restitution to Mr. Paulson, the motorcycle owner, in full. He'd saved up enough for a security deposit on an apartment. He was building credit again. For the first time in years, he wasn't drowning financially. But maybe the most important part had been the community at Second Chance Ranch and the Patriot Guard. Living with James and Roberto, he'd learned that healing wasn't linear. James had a bad relapse 2 months in, skipping therapy and starting to use again. But instead of abandoning him, the community rallied. They got him into an intensive outpatient program, supported him through withdrawal, never gave up on him. Now James was back on track, celebrating 60 days clean. Roberto had moved out last month, transitioning to his own apartment and a full-time warehouse job. But he still came back for Monday meetings and Saturday rides. Once you were part of this family, you were part of it forever. Michael had also started doing something he never thought he would, sharing his own story to help others. Twice now, he'd gone with Bulldog to court hearings for other veterans in trouble. He'd stood in courtrooms and told judges what Second Chance Ranch and the Patriot Guard had done for him. Both times, the veteran had received treatment instead of jail time. It felt good. It felt like purpose. There was a knock on the bathroom door. "Torres, you almost ready? Sun's coming up and Bulldog wants to hit the road by 6. That was Danny Ortiz, the young Marine with the prosthetic leg. He'd become one of Michael's closest friends over the past months, probably because they'd both served in Afghanistan around the same time. Danny was planning to start a non-profit to help veterans with disabilities access adaptive sports programs. He'd already gotten a grant approved and was incorporating as an official organization. 2 minutes, Michael called back. He took one last look in the mirror. 3 months ago, he'd seen a broken man. Now he saw someone healing, someone with a future. He headed outside to where the bikes were gathering. The November morning was cool. Finally, Phoenix's brutal summer had released its grip, and the desert sunrise was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. About 40 bikes were assembled in the parking area, their chrome gleaming in the early light. Bulldog was doing a walk around on his bike, checking tire pressure and fluid levels. He looked up as Michael approached and broke into a wide grin. "There he is. You ready for your first real ride?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Michael said, though his hands were shaking slightly with nervous excitement. "You're going to do fine. Just remember, ride your own ride. Don't try to keep up with the crazy ones." Bulldog gestured toward a group of younger bikers who were revving their engines enthusiastically. "We're riding up to Jerome today, about 2 hours north. Ghost town, tourist trap, but the ride up the mountain is beautiful. And there's a veterans memorial up there we'd like to visit." More riders kept arriving. Maria Santos pulled up on her bike, a Victory Cross Country, and parked next to Michael's Honda. Sarah Mitchell arrived in her truck. She didn't ride herself, but often provided chase vehicle support for the group. Thomas Redhorse came out of the main building with a thermos of coffee, distributing it to the early arrivals. As the group assembled, Michael noticed a sedan pull into the parking lot. A woman got out, middle-aged and professional-looking, with a camera around her neck. "Who's that?" Michael asked Bulldog. The older man smiled. That's Jennifer Rodriguez from the Arizona Republic. She's doing a story on the Patriot Guard and veteran support programs. I invited her to ride along today, see what we're about. Hope that's okay. Michael felt a flash of anxiety. A reporter? Don't worry, she's one of the good ones. Her brother was a Marine. She gets it. And Michael, Bulldog's expression became serious. What you went through, what this group did for you, that's a story that needs to be told. There are veterans all over this state, all over this country, who don't know that help like this exists. If we can reach even one person who's about to give up, it's worth it. Michael nodded slowly. Bulldog was right. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about making sure the next veteran in crisis knew they had options. Jennifer approached, and Bulldog made introductions. She was warm and genuine, immediately putting Michael at ease. She explained that she'd been following the Patriot Guard for months, but hearing about Michael's court case had crystallized for her why this story mattered. "I'd love to interview you during the ride," she said to Michael. "Nothing invasive, just your perspective on how this community helped you. Would that be okay?" "Yeah," Michael said. "Yeah, that would be okay." At precisely 6 a.m., Bulldog called for everyone's attention. The riders gathered around, some on their bikes, others standing nearby. "All right, folks, here's the plan. We're riding up to Jerome via Route 89A. It's about 110 miles, should take us just over 2 hours with a couple of stops. Weather looks good. Clear skies, temperature should be perfect by the time we reach the higher elevations. We've got 42 bikes today, so we're riding in 3 groups of 14. Marcus, you're lead for Group 2. Sarah, you've got Group 3. I'll lead Group 1 with our newest rider, Michael Torres." There were cheers and whistles from the assembled bikers. Michael felt his face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. "Stay tight, ride smart, and let's show our new brother what this family's all about. Mount up!" The sound of 42 motorcycles starting up in sequence was glorious, a rolling thunder that Michael felt in his chest. He swung his leg over his Honda Shadow, turned the key, and hit the starter. The engine caught immediately, purring with the satisfaction of a machine that had been lovingly restored. Bulldog gave a hand signal, and Group 1 rolled out, heading toward the ranch gate and onto the main road. Michael positioned himself in the middle of the formation, with experienced riders around him. The group moved as a unit, maintaining perfect spacing, signaling lane changes, watching for hazards. As they merged onto the highway heading north out of Phoenix, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The wind in his face, the rumble of the engine beneath him, the presence of brothers and sisters on either side. It was freedom. It was belonging. It was being alive. They rode through the sprawling suburbs of North Phoenix, past Anthem and New River, the landscape gradually transitioning from desert flat to rolling hills. Jennifer was riding in Sarah's chase vehicle, and Michael knew she'd catch up with them during their first rest stop. About 45 minutes into the ride, they pulled into a gas station in a small town called Black Canyon City. The riders dismounted, stretched, refueled, and shared stories from the road. Michael was on an adrenaline high, his face hurting from smiling. "How you doing?" Danny asked, clapping him on the shoulder. "This is incredible," Michael said. "I forgot how good this feels. Wait till we hit the twisty roads up the mountain. That's where it gets really fun." Jennifer approached with her camera. "Michael, mind if we chat for a few minutes?" They found a spot away from the noise, sitting on a picnic table outside the gas station. Jennifer turned on her recorder and asked him to tell his story, not just the court case, but everything. His service, his struggles, the day he tried to steal the motorcycle, what it felt like to face jail time, and what happened when the bikers showed up. Michael talked for 20 minutes, and as he spoke, he realized how far he'd come. 3 months ago, he could barely talk about his experiences without breaking down. Now, while it was still emotional, he could see it with some perspective. He could see himself as more than just a victim of circumstances. He was a survivor, someone who'd been given a chance and was making the most of it. "What would you say to another veteran who's in the place you were 3 months ago?" Jennifer asked. Michael thought about it carefully. "I'd say that it feels like you're alone, like nobody cares and nobody can help. But that's the PTSD lying to you. That's the depression lying to you. There are people out there who understand what you're going through, who've been where you are, and who will stand with you. You just have to reach out. Call a veterans crisis line. Go to the VA even if you're frustrated with them. Find a veteran organization like the Patriot Guard. Show up at a VFW or American Legion Hall. Just don't give up." And what would you say to people who aren't veterans? People who might see a struggling vet and not know how to help? I'd say don't look away. That guy you see who's homeless, who might be acting strange or aggressive, there's a chance he's a veteran who's fighting battles you can't see. Ask if he's okay. Point him toward resources. Hell, just acknowledge him as a human being. That alone can make a difference. After the interview, they mounted up again and continued north. The landscape became more dramatic as they climbed in elevation. Red rock formations, steep canyon walls, scattered pine trees replacing the desert scrub. The road started to wind and twist, and Michael understood what Danny had meant. This was where motorcycles truly shined, leaning into curves, the engineering and physics of two wheels becoming a dance. They passed through Cordes Junction and started the steep climb up Mingus Mountain toward Jerome. The town clung impossibly to the side of the mountain, a former copper mining community that had nearly died in the 1950s, but had been reborn as an arts community and tourist destination. The Patriot Guard pulled into a parking area on the edge of town, near a small veterans memorial that overlooked the Verde Valley below. The view was spectacular. Miles of green valley floor, mountains in the distance, the whole landscape sprawling out beneath them. The riders gathered at the memorial, a simple stone monument with plaques listing the names of local veterans who had died in service. There were names from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Michael found himself scanning the list, looking for familiar surnames, wondering if he'd served with anyone related to these fallen heroes. Bulldog called for silence, and the group formed a semicircle around the memorial. Thomas Redhorse stepped forward and began to speak. "We come here," Thomas said, his voice carrying in the mountain air, "to remember those who didn't make it home, those who gave everything. But we also come here to commit ourselves to honoring their sacrifice by living fully, by healing, by being there for each other." He pulled out a small bundle of sage, lit it, and let the smoke drift. "In my tradition, we believe that healing is a journey, not a destination. We believe that we carry our ancestors with us, and they give us strength. Those names on this wall, they're watching over us. They want us to live. They want us to thrive. They want us to take care of each other." Thomas passed the sage to Bulldog, who held it for a moment before passing it to the next person. The ritual continued around the circle until it reached Michael. He held the smoking bundle, feeling the warmth, the sacred quality of the moment. He thought about Martinez, his friend who died in Afghanistan. He thought about all the others who hadn't made it home, and he made a silent promise. "I'll live for both of us. I'll make this second chance mean something." After the memorial, they walked into Jerome proper, a quirky town of art galleries, restaurants and shops built on steep hillsides. The group had lunch at a place called the Asylum Restaurant, a former hospital-turned-hotel and dining establishment with amazing views. Over burgers and fries, the conversation flowed. Maria told stories about her time in Desert Storm. Marcus talked about his plans to expand his construction company and hire even more veterans. Sarah mentioned that 3 more veterans had been referred to Second Chance Ranch just this week, all of them coming through the court liaison program that Judge Mitchell had established after Michael's case. "You started something," Sarah said to Michael. "That courtroom moment, it changed the whole system. Now judges know they have options. Now veterans know there's help available. You should be proud." Michael shook his head. It wasn't me. It was Bulldog and all of you. I was just the guy who needed saving. And now you're the guy who helps save others, Bulldog said. That's the whole point. After lunch, they rode back down the mountain. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, and the temperature was perfect. Mid-70s, clear skies, ideal riding weather. Michael felt centered in a way he hadn't in years. The combination of the physical activity, the beauty of the landscape, and the companionship of people who understood him had created something close to peace. They arrived back at Second Chance Ranch as the sun was setting. The bikes pulled in one by one, riders dismounting with stiff legs and wide smiles. Someone started a fire in the pit, and without needing to discuss it, the group settled into their familiar evening routine. Food, stories, laughter. Jennifer stayed for dinner, still taking notes, still asking questions. She interviewed several other veterans, getting their stories, documenting the breadth and depth of what the Patriot Guard and Second Chance Ranch were accomplishing. At one point, Michael found himself sitting next to James, his roommate, who'd been quiet most of the day. "You okay?" Michael asked. James nodded slowly. "Yeah, just watching you today, seeing how far you've come in 3 months. It gives me hope, you know. I'm still struggling. Some days are hard. But if you can do it, maybe I can too." "You can," Michael said firmly, "and you're not doing it alone. None of us are." As the evening wound down and people started drifting to their rooms, Bulldog pulled Michael aside for a private conversation. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," the older man said. "You remember how I told you about getting that call from my old service buddy about his son? Yeah, you helped him, and it started you on this path." "Right. Well, I got another call last week. There's a veteran in Tucson, young woman, Navy, served on a destroyer. She's facing charges for assaulting her boyfriend during a PTSD episode. Her public defender reached out because he heard about your case. The trial is in 2 weeks. Michael immediately understood. You want to show up for her, like you showed up for me. I want us to show up for her. You, me, as many riders as we can get. And I want you to speak. Tell your story. Show her that there's hope." Michael felt the weight of responsibility, but also the rightness of it. "Of course, absolutely." Bulldog smiled. "You're becoming a leader in this community, Michael. Whether you realize it or not, people look up to you. Your story matters." After Bulldog left, Michael walked to his room but found himself too energized to sleep. He detoured to the common building and found Thomas Redhorse in the small office, working on paperwork. "Can't sleep?" the older man asked. "Too much thinking," Michael admitted. He sat down across from Thomas. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do you keep doing this? How do you keep opening your doors to broken people, knowing that some of them won't make it? Knowing that some of them will relapse or quit or worse?" Thomas set down his pen and leaned back. "Because some of them do make it. You made it. Roberto made it. Danny, Maria, Marcus, they all made it. And every person who heals goes on to help others heal. It creates ripples that spread farther than I can see." He paused, then continued. "After Vietnam, I came home angry and lost. I drank for 15 years. I hurt people I loved. I was homeless for a while. And then someone took a chance on me, a counselor at a VA facility who refused to give up, who saw something in me worth saving. He's dead now, but I made him a promise before he died, that I'd pass it forward. This ranch is me keeping that promise. I want to do that too," Michael said. "I want to help other veterans the way I've been helped." "Then do it," Thomas said simply. "You don't have to wait until you're fully healed, whatever that means. You can start right now. You already are, by being honest about your struggles, by being present for your roommates, by agreeing to go to that trial in Tucson. You're already doing it." Michael nodded slowly, feeling the truth of it. He wasn't the broken man who'd stood in that courtroom 3 months ago. He was still healing, still working through his demons, but he was also becoming someone who could help others on the same journey. That night, Lying in his bed with Roberto snoring gently and James reading by lamplight, Michael thought about Judge Mitchell's words. "You're getting a second chance that most people don't get. Don't make me regret it." He wouldn't. He'd make that second chance count. Not just for himself, but for every veteran who needed someone to believe in them, to stand for them, to show them that healing was possible. The road forward wasn't easy. He knew he'd still have bad days. He knew the PTSD would never fully disappear. He knew there would be times when the darkness crept back in, but now he had tools to fight it. He had people to lean on, he had purpose, and he had a family of 60 bikers who'd proven they'd ride into hell itself to save one of their own. 2 weeks later, Michael stood in a Tucson courtroom wearing his cleanest clothes and his heart on his sleeve. Around him, 65 bikers filled every seat and lined the walls, their leather vests covered in patches and pride. A young female Navy veteran named Jessica sat at the defense table, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the sea of support that had appeared for her. And when the judge asked who wanted to speak on Jessica's behalf, Michael Torres stood up, his voice steady and strong. "Your Honor, my name is Michael Torres. 3 months ago, I stood in a courtroom just like this one, facing jail time for a crime I committed while in crisis, and 60 bikers walked in to save me. Today, we're here to save Jessica. Let me tell you what's possible when we give veterans a second chance."